A very warm welcome to all of you in the Council of Europe Youth Center here in Strasbourg. A warm greeting to the people who are also at home here, but nevertheless deserve to be welcomed. Nina Germusha, the chair of the Advisory Council on Youth, George Orlando, the chair of the Joint Council on Youth, our colleagues from the EU Council of Youth Partnership, and the team from the European Youth Center and the youth sector here in Strasbourg. I hope I didn't leave everybody out. If I did, I apologize. I think it's fascinating when you look at every single major global issue, problem. It doesn't even have to be global, it just has to be big, important, threatening. And young people, you can never play 2 degrees of separation. Every time, with every problem, you are smack in the middle of it. Everything that happens, everything that threatens up, it seems that young people are getting the double portion servings of it. Unemployment, economic crisis and problems. Who's crowding the unemployment bureaus? Mental issues, young people. Climate change, climate crisis. Young people are going to be enjoying the consequences and implications of our actions and inactions for far longer than us senior citizens who will have the privilege to clock out before. I apologize for the choice of words, but I think it's appropriate given the circumstances, both as a metaphor and literally. The shit really starts hitting the fan. And democratic backsliding, you can call it whatever you want. It's something that we are seeing around us every day, getting worse, including when it comes to civic space, the opportunity for civil society, including youth organizations, to be active, to bring their voice, their concerns to the attention of the public. And the 2 last problems, together with others, the climate crisis and democratic backsliding, of course, are also very much connected. It's actually a vicious circle in which the consequences of the climate crisis, which we already feel every day in a dramatic and often tragic manner, is creating concerns and anxieties and fear can quickly transform into even stronger, more negative feelings of intolerance and hatred, and all those emotions can be easily exploited, manipulated, instrumentalized by those trying to undermine our democracies with alternative political paradigms. And then those alternative political paradigms, to use a very mild word, for those who are actually trying to undermine democracies, are of course also instrumentalizing those concerns about the climate, and they're obstructing any effective measure, action that should be taken in order to mitigate the circumstances, to try to reverse some of the trends, to stop that descent before it comes too late. So it really is a vicious circle in which the democratic backsliding and the climate crisis are feeding each other into a ever faster downward spiral. And again, the young people are really in the middle of it. And because of both, what we observe is that the things are getting worse. And the space for making that case, to express concerns, to protest against the inaction or wrong actions, and to do something about it, to make proposals, to start an action, is becoming smaller and smaller. So this is really why you are all here today. That connection between environmental crisis, climate crisis, and democracy has not always really been evident. The Council of Europe is an organization that was set up 70 years ago to defend democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. It has actually started to be active in the area of environment relatively early on some specific areas, protecting biodiversity through Berne Convention and others. But it has, for a very long time, even though being very successful in its own, being a little, shall I say, on the margins of the attention of the governments of the member states, who had difficulties, struggled, or were not really able or willing to make that connection between environment and democracy. They actually also, I think, to be honest, also had struggled and took some time before they acknowledged the democratic crisis, democratic backsliding, the fact that our democracy in crisis, nah, it's all good. Environmental crisis, equally all good. But things have started to change, I think, faced with the evidence that we see every day around us. And I think that in many ways, they have started to change because of the action of young people, including here in the Council of Europe. It has been, again, the young people in this organization, also on these important issues, democracy and environment, that have been among the first, if not the first, that have started to make the case, started to point it out at problems, starting to calling for solutions, and sort of managed to shake the organization into action. And that have started to give results relatively recently. I think we can pinpoint to maybe 2-3 years ago when you could see a qualitative change in the way our governments collectively start to look at these issues and started to make actions. In 2022, the Committee of Ministers recognized that life and well-being on our planet are contingent on humanity's collective capacity to guarantee both human rights and a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment for present and future generations. Indeed, all Council of Member States voted in favor of the United Nations General Assembly resolution of 2022, which recognized the human rights to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, which, from what I hear, some member states still have some difficulties accepting in practice. And it was in their Reykjavik declaration, that's what, a year and a half ago, that the heads of state and government underlined the urgency of additional efforts to protect the environment, as well as to counter the impact of the triple planetary crisis of environmental pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And it was since 2022 that the Joint Council on Youth started working on a recommendation looking at some of those questions. And it was at its 50th meeting on 9 and 10 April at the European Center in Budapest that the Joint Committee on Youth agreed on a draft recommendation of the Committee of Ministers to Member States on young people and climate action. And that recommendation will be discussed this afternoon by the Committee of Ministers Rapporteur Group on Education, Culture, Sport, Youth and Environment. And that's why I apologize that some of us will have to leave. I will actually have to leave even sooner, and some of our colleagues later on, because we will have to be there to present, perhaps defend, the recommendation as it has been drafted by the committee. I promise I will come back, if not today, then tomorrow, at least to listen in, because I think this is really a very, very important symposium. The decision of the Joint Council on Youth was made, incidentally or not, on the same day as the historic ruling of the European Court of Human Rights in the case on Verein, Klimasenioren Schweiz and others versus Switzerland. And I know we know that this is the decision of the European Court that has caused some comments and reactions, particularly in Switzerland, but I think it's without a case that it was an important milestone. The case was brought by 4 women concerned about the consequences of global warming on their living conditions and health, and the court found violations of Article 8, right to respect for private and family life, and Article 6, access to court of the European Convention on Human Rights. The court found the implications in 2 other cases, Carême versus France and Duarte Agostinho and others versus Portugal and 32 others, to be inadmissible. In that recent case brought to the European Court of Human Rights, which I just mentioned, Duarte Agostinho versus Portugal and 33 others, which has received much attention in the press because it was the first historic ruling of the court regarding the environment. Even though it was declared inadmissible, that was not a decision on the merits, of course. Today, climate activism is combining social movements and climate process with more targeted legal actions, such as the ones that I have just mentioned, that end up at the European Court of Human Rights, with a focus on climate and rights, including the right to a healthy environment and intergenerational justice. Young environmental defenders are looking to claim those rights, for example, through civil disobedience, direct action in the climate movement, and strategic litigation. They are bringing lawsuits against states for not upholding rights obligations, seeking to bring about social change beyond individual cases in this context of increased criminalization and repression. And the problem is, of course, that the legitimate demands of young people, youth activists, climate activists and concerns are increasingly being met with repression, criminalization, and stigmatization. Another example where the crisis, climate crisis and the democratic backsliding are connected and feeding each other. We are seeing a rise in the number of arrests and prosecutions of environmental human rights defenders in Europe. Young people are increasingly calling for a move away from climate change mitigation towards climate justice and the recognition of the differentiated impact of climate change on vulnerable or marginalized groups or communities, such as minority groups or young people in rural and remote areas. Moreover, a range of climate emotions, including eco-anxiety, is emerging as an area of concern. There is an increasing need to understand how young people's mental health and well-being are being affected by the crisis. This seminary, was organized, and you were invited to come here in order to feed our reflection and our work on how to make the next steps once, hopefully, the recommendation this afternoon is going to be endorsed by the Committee of Ministers body. The outcomes of your discussions over the next 2.5 days will provide valuable input into the ongoing environment and climate-related work of the Youth Partnership and of the Council of Youth Department, but also of the Council of Europe as a whole, because it will also inform the work of the newly created ad hoc multidisciplinary group on the environment, which has been set up also as a consequence of Reykjavik to prepare a draft Council of Europe strategy on the environment. Another example of what I said, qualitative change, at least in acknowledging and recognizing the importance of environment for democracy. This group is tasked with integrating a youth perspective into its work and with consulting the youth sector as appropriate, which is where your discussions and the work of the youth sector will hopefully come and be reflected in the overall Council of Europe strategy and action in the future on human rights, democracy and environment. With this symposium, the European Commission and the Council of Europe are continuing our long-standing successful cooperation. It is an important contribution to the implementation of our respective priorities and aims in the fields of youth and of the environment. I'll stop, I think, because time is running short. I just want to come back again to that link between democracy, democratic backsliding, crisis of democracy, and climate crisis. That, you know, every time when we see a cloud on the horizon and rain coming, we started to get very nervous about its consequences, what is going to happen, what has been happening in Central Europe in the recent weeks, what's been happening across Europe. Every time the sun doesn't stop scorching the earth, bringing drought. And all that is causing anxiety, feeling of uncertainty, fear of future. And all this anxiety and fear, as I said before, can quickly be transformed, instrumentalized, turned into even more negative feelings of lack of confidence, the mildest, but also intolerance and even hatred, and be manipulated for the undermining of our democracy. And the way out of that is not to pretend that those problems are not there. The way out of that is not to say, hey, listen, don't be afraid, there's no reason to panic. Because we have grounds for concerns. We have good reasons to be worried about future when it comes to environment and democracy. The way out is to find effective solutions to both of the problems, to the environmental crisis, not just mitigating, but trying to stop, hopefully reverse some of the trends that we are seeing in the recent years. So this is why you're here. You have a double objective: to save democracies and save the environment, or at least help to and contribute to it. I know it sounds like a lot and a tall order, but you know, we have to do it because just imagine the alternatives. Thank you very much.